Hello, I'm Frances Deegan Horowitz, president of the City University Graduate Center. Welcome to Women, a series of programs for and about us. I'm so pleased that Dr. Myriam Sarachik is able to be with us today. Distinguished professor of physics at City College, her research and teaching inspires students, both male and female, to pursue careers in the sciences. Welcome. It's good to have you here. But your life started in Belgium. Mm-hmm. And when the Second World War was about to break out, or maybe had broken out?
It had. You know, the Germans invaded different places at different times. They invaded Belgium on May 10th of 1940, and we fled at that point and went to Calais. We walked to Calais.
Oh my.
And the Germans were taking Calais and Dunkirk at that point, and before we knew it, we were not in front but behind the line, and we went back to Belgium for some period of time.
But ultimately your family made its way to Cuba.
Yes.
And
yes.
How long were you in Cuba?
5.5 years. I grew up in Cuba. I was 8 years old when I arrived. I was 13 and a half when I left, so you can well imagine those are very formative years.
Yes. And you were fluent in Spanish by the time you left?
Oh, absolutely.
Have you retained that?
I've retained that. I've retained French as well. And it's good to have those languages.
Oh, yes.
It really is.
And you came to the United States, to New York?
Yes. And I've been in New York ever since. And I'm one of those who loves New York. I really do like it very, very much.
Yes.
It's an exciting place.
And where did you go to college?
I went to Barnard. I actually arrived here when I was beginning high school age. I went to Bronx Science. After that, I went to Barnard. But I took my physics courses and many of my math courses across the street at Columbia because girls didn't take physics. More girls did take math and physics, but not all that many either.
And why, how did you buck that stereotype?
Well, I think, and I've thought about that, I think it is very important, particularly in the early teens, when both boys and girls go through some difficult times, to feel that you're acceptable, that you're accepted, that you're one of the crew, that you're doing. And I didn't fit anyway, because I had been a refugee when I first arrived in Cuba, and then when I came to the United States, I wasn't really a refugee anymore, but I was different. And I think what made it possible for me, at least partly, because I'm sure there are many more factors than one, is that I was already different and I was never going to quite fit in anyway. So I might as well be different in more ways than one.
Were you discouraged as a female about going on in science?
By whom?
By teachers, by family, by friends?
No, my family actually didn't really expect me ever to have a career of any kind. In fact, I didn't, because I came from a background where my mother didn't work outside the home. None of my aunts and uncles, and I have many, aunts, and I have many aunts because my father was one of 10 and my mother was one of 9, so you can well imagine I had lots of aunts. They did not work outside the home either, and it was just simply not expected. On the other hand, my father admired intellectual pursuits very much. He was a self-taught man because he did not have opportunity for a formal education, but he was one of the people that I know who was really knowledgeable broadly, widely, and he admired intellect and physics in particular very much. And I think that if he had had the opportunity, he probably would have studied physics.
And when you
So he encouraged me to do it because, in a sense, he was getting vicarious pleasure out of it. On the other hand, he didn't really expect me to do anything with it. Right.
And so when you finished your bachelor's degree, having done physics and math, you were at a choice point in many ways.
Well, I'll tell you what happened. I decided that I had gone as far as it was appropriate for me to go. I looked for a position, and I did get a position at IBM Watson Laboratories, which was a small laboratory near Columbia University, which allowed me to continue to take courses, one or two at a time. And I felt, I wasn't doing any harm, right? It was perfectly fine for me to take courses. And I really did love to do it. And I wanted to go on for advanced degrees, but I just couldn't see my way to allowing myself to do that. And I was married by that time to Phil, my husband, to whom I'm still married. And he was in the engineering school at Columbia. And he was very bright. So one of the faculty people offered him an opportunity, an assistantship and an opportunity to go on toward his PhD. And we talked about it, and he said, okay, he would do it. And at that point, it seemed to me, why not? I allowed myself. And I had a friend who was a year ahead of me, who was another woman. There were very few women in the program who had no problem with going on toward an advanced degree. It was just simply not a question she had ever asked herself whether she should or not. And I looked at her and I said, if she can, and Phil's going to, I will too. And I did.
And in that journey toward the PhD, you must have been one of the very few women in the program.
Yes.
Was that ever an issue?
Being a woman or being a man, I wouldn't call it an issue, but it's certainly something that is and that makes a difference. Certainly, at the time I was in graduate school at Columbia, when there were so few women, it most decidedly was an issue. Everybody, I was unusual because I was a woman. The faculty was largely male. There were 2 women on the faculty, but the male faculty had very low expectations for me. That doesn't mean that they did not expect me to pass all the exams at the same level or do a thesis of the same caliber. But they really did not consider that I was going to be a serious contributor to the field of physics.
How did you understand that message? Was it said directly to you?
Most of the time, no, but some of the time, really quite explicitly. I had a graduate advisor. He was not my thesis advisor. This was at the time when I was taking courses, and each semester, the decision had to be made which new courses you were going. And my record was very good. I didn't know it because the A's, B's, and C's were known to the faculty, but not to me. And when it came time to make a decision concerning what direction to go in, whether to do a thesis, whether to continue, my advisor said to me, I don't know what to tell you. And I didn't understand that. And finally, he said, I don't know what to tell you. If you were a man, I would know what to tell you. I would tell you to go on for your PhD degree, but you're a woman.
Oh my goodness.
So I don't know what to tell you. So that was one instance where it was really quite explicitly stated. But I think it was there much of the time.
But you persevered.
Well, I am a perseverer. I am.
Which you have to be as a scientist.
Well, not only as a scientist, but I think to be a woman in physics at that time, I've said this a number of times. There were men who thought that I must be better than men, because otherwise I would have not been able to stay in the field. And there were men who thought that I was clearly not as good as a man, because after all I was a woman. And the truth of the matter is that those of us who stuck it out and stayed in the field were neither better nor worse. We were just more tenacious. That's what it took.
And when you finished your PhD, were there jobs?
Well, when I finished my PhD, the first thing I did was to stay for a little while and do a one-year postdoc at IBM Watson Labs. And then I had my first daughter, Karen. And after having stayed home for a couple of months, I realized, and particularly Phil realized, this was not for me. It was not going to work out. And I started to look for a job, and I couldn't find one. I just couldn't find one. And my male colleagues, who were no better than I, no worse, they got multiple offers to choose from, and I couldn't get any offers. So I think it was not only the fact that I was a woman, but I had just had a baby, and they were just not willing to take a chance on me. I did finally go for help to a man who was on the faculty at Columbia, with whom I had some very, very nice dealings. He had just earned a Nobel Prize quite recently. And I went to him and I spoke to him and I said, his name was Polycarp Cush. I told him that I was having terrible, terrible difficulty finding a job. And he argued with me for a good 20 minutes, telling me that I didn't really want a full-time job. And I said, yes, I do want a full-time job, and I want to do research. And he said, well, not really. Do you really want them? And it just went on and on and on. At the end of this long discussion between us, he said, look, I don't know why you want to do what you want to do, but we trained you, and you have a right to have a job if that's what you want. And the next day, I had an offer that I really wanted. So.
And what would he say today, you're having become a member of the National Academy of Sciences, you're having served as president of the American Physical Society, you're having just won the L'Oreal UNESCO Award for Women in Science. What would he say?
I don't know. He's not alive anymore. I think he would be very surprised, actually. He really would be surprised. But so am I. So am I. I also got the Buckley Prize, which is not on your list, which is sort of the, as somebody just said, the Oscar of my particular field of physics. So it's been quite a year for me.
It has, and many congratulations to you. So let's turn now to your particular field of physics. How would you describe that to a layman?
I look at electrical and magnetic properties of solids, semiconductors, crystals of various kinds. I do those measurements at very low temperatures. Now, very low temperatures means pretty low temperatures.
Very, very cold.
Very, very cold. It means in Celsius, minus 200 and 70 degrees and lower. Actually, we go to about 0.05, or have gone in my lab, to 0.05 degrees above absolute zero. We look at how electrons move through the solids in response to putting a potential difference or a voltage, like plugging, into the wall, and how they move through the solids, how they do that as you vary the temperature, as you vary various other things in the experiment, tells you about the interactions between the electrons. It tells you all sorts of very interesting things. The other thing, the magnetic properties, have to do with the fact that each electron, in a metal like copper or brass, when you put a voltage across it, the electrons flow.
Right.
Okay? In an insulator, they do not. They're attached to their atomic centers, and they don't really move.
So
one of
for
the
instance,
things,
if you put electric on here, it won't move on this table. If you put an electric
no. If I put a wire here and I put a wire here, and I plug the two into the wall, ain't nothing going to happen, right?
Right.
But if this were made out of copper,
right,
it would. Okay, your toaster is a bad conductor. That's why it heats up and it toasts your bread. but it is a conductor. If you take a piece of wood, or if you take this table, those are insulators.
Right.
And one of the things that we have been looking at, actually for a number of years, is the transition between the conducting phase and the insulating phase. Okay, and that happens when you vary one of a number of things. One of them is the pressure sometimes. The other is you put in controlled amounts of impurity, and you go from one of the phases to the other phase. And in order to be able to see that carefully well and to study it in detail, and it has a lot of fascinating aspects to it, you've got to take the material down to very low temperatures. And the reason is that at the higher temperatures, there's a lot of thermal energy. Everything is moving, everything is wiggling, right? And it masks the stuff that we're interested in looking at, namely what the electrons do. So you take the solids down to lower and lower temperature, they stop wiggling so much, and you can see what the electrons are doing.
And you've also worked on the physics of transitions.
Well, the metal insulator transition is the transition that I have studied. Now, what you mean by a transition in this context is a transition between different phases of matter. People are familiar with gases, vapor, vapor, liquid, solid, and there is a phase transition between those forms of matter.
So water can become steam.
Water can become steam. Water can also freeze and become ice. Right?
And that's a phase transition.
That's a phase transition. And there are, and a magnetic phase transition. If you take a magnet, which is a piece of iron, that's a magnet. That's a phase of matter. But when you take that and you heat it up to high temperatures, it loses its magnetic property. Then when you cool it down, it goes back to being a magnet. That is also a phase transition from the ferromagnetic phase, which means the sort of magnet that you know well, and the unmagnetic phase, where everything is moving around and random.
And what is the use of this knowledge? Or does it not have a use in terms of really basic understanding of phenomena?
Look, I mean, there are many aspects to it. The basic understanding is part of the quest of man and womankind to understand things and to I mean, It's a really deep intellectual pursuit that started many years ago. You probably know, or perhaps you don't, that the Greeks did know that the earth was round. We lost that information somewhere along the way and had to redo that whole thing. But people have been fascinated by why the world does, how the world is put together, how the universe is put together, how you know, the whole concept of electrons is what, I mean, electrons were actually not found specifically until not so long ago. And now we can look at a lens with scanning electron microscopes and various other techniques. We can actually look at things atom by atom. Now that's fascinating. But the other aspect, of course, is that it's changed our lives, because in understanding, I mean, I'm interested because of the fundamental aspects of it. I find them fascinating, and I like to study them. But this is the core of knowledge that ultimately leads to controlling things in order to do things for you. And our whole technology is based on that. Everything you use, I mean, transistors, radios, televisions, MRIs, it all comes from that knowledge base that has been amassed little by little, and which makes us understand how nature works.
That is one of the most eloquent explanations for why basic research that has no seeming immediate application is so important.
You never know where it's going to come from. In other words, if you start out doing fundamental research with a purpose, an ultimate goal in mind in terms of applications, you are missing all this stuff out there which may produce totally unexpected things.
Yes, and you know, it's very difficult to gather the support for continuing just basic research for exactly the reasons that you say it's so important.
Yes.
Because people want quick results, they want to know how it's going to be applied,
Yes.
and yet, as you point out, much of the modern world that we enjoy, the ease of living that's made possible, came from those basic research questions that at the time had no obvious application.
Now, you know, I may be getting it wrong in detail, but Gladstone asked Faraday. Faraday was the guy who, you know, many, you know, investigated electricity. Right. And so Gladstone asked him at one point, "What's it good for?" And Faraday looked at him and said, "I don't know, but you will be taxing it."
You know, as you were speaking, my thought was, suppose one of those people had succeeded in discouraging you from going on, what would have been lost to this world of science knowledge?
Well, I don't know. I think that I would have done something or other. I think the thing that has shaped me, more than the specific road that I chose, is that I wanted a road to be on. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yes, I do.
So this road has been a wonderful road for me. There's just no question about that. But I just wanted to be on a road. Well,
one is reminded of the current controversy over women in science.
Oh dear, yes.
And how misguided that whole discussion has been.
Well, you know, it does a couple of things. It reminds people that these subliminal attitudes have not disappeared. I mean, you know, there are people who think, well, what's the problem? We have to keep working at it. And it has put it in the middle of the table, front and center, for discussion, which may not be such a bad thing, right? We've been trying to bring this issue to people's attention, and it's hard to get people's attention. This certainly did that.
It surely did.
Yes.
And what's next?
For me?
Yes.
I still have a running lab. We're getting some wonderful results. I've been traveling an awful lot more than I used to, and seeing parts of the world that I never thought I would get to. And my purpose is to continue to enjoy and to find things and to be useful and to carry my weight and to enjoy.
Well, that you have certainly done, and I'm sorry, but we're out of time. My thanks to Dr. Myriam Sarachik for joining us on Women to Women. For Frances Deegan Horowitz, I'm Frances Deegan Horowitz for the City University Graduate Center and Women to Women. Thank you very much.
Thank you.